Can someone tell me how to start reading comics?
I have zero knowledge about superheroes and hate superhero movies, but feel like reading non-superhero comics.
Can someone tell me which one from Marvel Comics should I start my comics reading with?
Is the boys' comics even darker and grittier than the show?
What is DC's best comic series for starters?
I never really was into reading comics, but I'm certainly interested after all these movies. Could you please suggest some comic where I could start with?
If you feel like you can relate with any of my friends or their questions, then this video is for you. These are just some of the questions that we are being asked regularly by those who want to get into this wonderful world of comics but have no idea where to start with. While comics can look impenetrable from the outside, I am here to tell you that it's not as hard as you think. At the same time, I'll clear up misconceptions some readers have about starting and the medium as a whole. Like, many people think that comics are for kids. However, after watching this video, you will realize that it's clearly not the case. Throughout the video, I will also give you a few tips to help read comics and enjoy them as much as we do. While I have your attention, please subscribe to our channel for more such regular videos, and do not forget to watch this video till the end to know which comic book is ideal for you. Please like it and share it with your friends. My name is Shubham and welcome to Unnecessary Comic Stuff, and let's get started. I have just one goal for this video, that one or more of these books will at least turn one of you into a comic book fan for life. In the recent years, comics have expanded and they are not just superhero comics like majority of the popular comics were for baby boomers and millennials. Nowadays you have comics like Saga, Black Science and Sex Criminals that have made it to the forefront, and they are nothing like a superhero comic. Talking about the superhero side of comics, DC Comics is the home to DC universe of characters like Superman, Batman and Wonder Woman, while Marvel Comics is the home to characters like Spiderman, Captain America and Squirrel Girl. DC and Marvel are known as the big two in the comics industry and own the most well-known superhero universes that are now reflected in some of the most popular movies every year. But if Batman or Captain America comics are not something for you, then don't worry. Although the superhero comics will always remain dominant, there have been other genres of comics under Marvel, Image Comics, Dark Horse Comics, Vertigo Comics that have recently made their way to the forefront now. Let's begin with what comics are as a buffer. Comics are a medium in which you express your ideas through art combined with text and other visuals. They are often in the form of juxtaposed sequences of panels and images. The picture on the screen gives you a rundown on how to read comics. Now I know many of you might already know this, but it's helpful for absolute beginners. Some artists and creators do change that layout depending on what you're reading and what they prefer. However, this is pretty much the standard way one would read a comic. Now that all of you are up to date with how to read comics, let's smash some common misconceptions first. There are a lot of misconceptions about reading comics, and sometimes these can be uninformed facts that can prove to be a roadblock for potential comic readers. It's a real shame and many of these are not even true. Once these misconceptions have been eliminated, getting into comics will be an easy task for you. Contrary to popular belief, you don't have to start a comic book with issue number 1. For many readers, their first issue was not a number 1, it was some random number, sometimes even in the hundreds. For example, I read a lot of comics, but I didn't start each one of them with issue number 1. My first X-Men was issue number 188. While I didn't know 100% of what was going on with the comics, but I soon got up to speed with characters I was unfamiliar with, and it didn't lessen my experience. When I was confused about something or wanted to know a little bit more about a particular character, Google had all the answers that I needed. While I do admit that it can be pretty much confusing to pick a series mid-story. Although, if you start with an issue that begins a story arc, it doesn't matter if it's issue number 1 or not. While comic books are not everywhere, they're not as hard to find as you might think. From comic book stores, bookshops, online to your mobile phones, comics can be literally found anywhere and everywhere. More on that coming right up in a couple of minutes. While the most popular comics are mostly superheroes, there are a vast array of different genres represented, such as science fiction, horror, humor, fantasy, romance, war, crime, etc. Some genres you might need to dig up a little bit more to find, but if it's a genre, then it has probably been already done in comics. The late Stan Lee is credited for stating, "Every comic is someone's first." It's a notion that many writers and editors, especially at Marvel and DC, take into consideration when creating comics. Writers will keep the readers in the loop with storytelling techniques, and editors will often include recap episodes at the starting of the pages of comics. Additionally, with the power of internet, even the most convoluted histories are not that hard to figure out. With sites like Wikipedia, Comic Vine, and a variety of wikis, the answers are at your fingertips. Further to this, it's not required to know the full history of every character. Just like the people in real life, not every single event that has happened to a character informs their current story. Often, a lot of characters' past is never referenced after a certain period of time, In some cases, they are entirely forgotten. Now that we have all the misconceptions covered, let's start with where to get comics and which comics to get. Of course, picking out the perfect comic for a friend or a random stranger you've never met in your life can be quite tricky. But think about which kind of comic you might want to read. I understand that this can be quite hard at first. If you're unsure, just find the answer to one of these questions. Who's your favorite comic book character? Which comic book movies did you enjoy? What kind of movies, games, TV shows do you like to watch? If none of these work, just ask yourself what kind of stories do you want to read. Your answer can be something as simple as I want to read Batman to something more complex like I am interested in stories that are set in a dystopian future. Once you have an answer, you can start to look for comic books that match your criteria. To look for a book, you can start with some of these alternatives. Do you have friends that read comics? If that's a yes, then beg them to lend you some books. Because not only this is a free source of comic books, but generally they know what kind of stories you like, so they can help to expose you with the right ones. Before you slap your money down the counter or the online equivalent on something that you're not quite sure about, I highly recommend that you take advantage of free and legal sources of comics. This allows you to start reading comics without investing anything financially, but it also allows you to first develop a taste for comics. Does your local library has a graphic novel section? If it does, then you should totally check that out first. Good libraries will have a great range to choose from, which will allow you to sample different kinds of stories. Also, it's not a big deal if you don't like a particular graphic novel and return it, so you can borrow something else. I know there's a chance that your local library might not have a graphic novel section, because mine doesn't. So, figure out a local comic book shop, pick out the comics you want or you want to start with, or just ask the shop employees to help you with your taste, and voila! Just visit the store regularly and prepare to spend around $3 to $5 per issue of every comic that you want to read, and enjoy the heck out of comics every week. If none of these methods work for you, don't worry, I have a way out. If you prefer to read digitally on your phone, tablet or laptop, then Comixology is the way to go. They have thousands of comics available for sale and often have generous sales and have great reading software too. I mean, they're owned by freaking Amazon. Most of the comics come in the form of first issues, previews and occasional mini-series, but they have almost every genre possible. You'll need to sign up to Comixology first before you can take advantage of the free service. Again, Comixology is just like a friend. I personally love it, and it's not because they are sponsoring this video. So it's true. Coming now to a few issues I'd recommend you guys to read to get started, without spoilers but with notes about the types of readers that might enjoy them. Even if they are followed by a few honorable mentions, these are in no order of preference, so you can just pick anyone that suits your taste and get started with. These are can't miss books that might turn you guys into lifelong fans of comics. So when the next person asks what kind of comics do you like, consider popping a few one of these onto your list. I chose to start with this one because in my opinion it's the best comic series written of my favorite superhero. Frank Miller's mid-80s reimagining of a aged Batman coming out of retirement sets up years of the macho, grim and gritty Batman that we know today. There's also surprising humor and inspiration here in one of my favorite Batman comics, highly recommended for new beginners. First published in 1986, The Dark Knight follows an aging, retired Batman in a dystopian future as he faces his own mortality and is drawn back to the world. Over 30 years after its debut, Batman, The Dark Knight remains an undisputed classic and one of the most influential stories ever told in the comics medium. Miller's Dark Knight Returns remains the best way to understand Batman and much of the broader pop culture landscape with its endless parade of iconic anti-heroes and grim and gritty reboots. Miller helped us all understand who Batman really is. So if you're looking to start with DC Comics, I'd recommend you please start with this one. Coming over to the biggest rival of DC Comics, we would recommend you to start with Ultimate Spiderman Volume 1 from Marvel Comics. Before the Electronic Stark Industry designed suits, there was a young teenage weirdo who struggled to get to class on time. Ultimate Spider-Man is a great story tackling the humble beginnings of a beloved web-slinging superhero. Let's face it, the original first comics of Spider-Man, Amazing Fantasy, are kinda old and boring, making Ultimate Spider-Man the perfect reboot. In this story, Brian Michael Bendis shows a more present-day Peter Parker and how he embraces the role of Spider-Man in Marvel's second universe. As I read this book when I was a teenager, I will always have a special connection with Spidey. It's just cool how a superhero has normal high school problems like homework, crappy teachers, and even girls. Ultimate Spider-Man is truly something very special and the perfect place to jump into Spider-Man. It's fun, it's clever, and it's beautifully constructed. Who would ask for more? Alan Moore and Dave Gibson's classic deconstruction of superheroes has been voted as one of Time's 100 best novels. Not just graphic novels, novels, and was also developed into a feature-length film from director Zack Snyder in 2009. It is also the inspiration for HBO's Watchmen series, which came out just last year. The comic series convinced me that comic books could be intellectually rewarding and inventive, and it is especially for mature readers. It features the characters of Rorschach, Ozymandias, Dr. Manhattan, Silk Spectre, Night Owl, and the Comedian. When the Comedian dies, a series of events are set into motion that bring world closer to a deadly threat no one saw coming. The plot summary I just gave you, of course, doesn't portray the sheer amount of character and development, themes, and nuances more included in 12 issues. You have to check it out if this sounds like something that you would like to read. And to be a bit cliche about it, it is a Citizen Kane of comics. And if Watchmen doesn't sell you on the literary potential of comic books, we're just out of luck. Neil Gaiman is the author of many celebrated comics and fiction. The Sandman is his comic book masterpiece, celebrating a love of stories while endlessly covering cerebral territory. Sandman centers on the dream of Endless and his realm of dreams, where any story is possible, meaning the book bounces everywhere from a serial killer convention to Arabian Nights version of India. Also, Sandman is so popular that DC Comics resurrected the brand in 2019 for an expanded Sandman universe. The Sandman falls into the dark fantasy genres such as urban fantasy and epic fantasy. If that's your cup of tea, go for it. Saga is often considered as Star Wars meets Game of Thrones. There are also comparisons between Lord of the Rings meets Romeo and Juliet. Saga has 33 issues currently. This book has everything. Intergalactic war, star-crossed lovers, high-tech, magic, and all told through a narrator who is a baby for most of the story. The most common comic on any Comics for People Who Don't Get Comics list, and for good reason. Saga is the romantic comedy space opera from Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. The series is heavily influenced by Star Wars and is based on ideas Vaughan conceived both as a child and as a parent. There are 1,000,001 comics, TV shows, and movies about space. Yet, Saga somehow manages to feel completely fresh, infusing modern sarcasm and innovative system design into the well-worn genre. More than anything, Saga feels like a story for adults, and Image comic series is definitely for mature readers only. If you have long held the suspicion that comics are junk media for only kids, Saga is a type of sophisticated yet fun adventure that can go a long way towards changing minds. Next on the list is Hawkeye by Matt Fraction. Matt Fraction's Marvel comic masterpiece is well worth the brief moment of wondering whether Hawkeye could truly have been one of the best comics for new readers. The 2012 Hawkeye series is brilliant, fun, and largely avoids complicated continuity questions that are present in most Marvel comics. All of this makes for a great pickup for new fans who want to see Marvel at its best. I picked this story up a few years ago and it was surprisingly a good read. Matt Fraction does a great job taking this powerless archer into a butt-kicking superhero who is experiencing some sort of hero midlife crisis. Artist David provides contemplating art that sort of has a cartoony feel, which I personally loved. The comic is action-packed, funny, and has a really compelling plot. Any new reader will be able to enjoy this as it does not require a lot of background reading and sort of creates a world on its own. Black Science is a creator-owned science fiction comic book series started by Rick Remender and Italian artist Matt Scalera. The first issue came out in November 2013 and it ended in September 2019. Filled with stunning artwork and a trippy yet emotional storyline, Black Science is a top-shelf sci-fi adventure from Image Comics. I am hard-pressed to think of a series in recent memory where the creative team was so perfectly matched. Remender spins a rollicking tale of anarchist scientists, alien death cults, philosophical quandaries, and multi-generational family drama that spread across a dazzling array of worlds, both alien and familiar, and blends pulpy science fiction and weird fantasy with wild abandon. Black Science cramps in a lots of twists and turns, especially in its final issues, from shifting antagonists to revelations concerning the Eververse's true nature. And frankly, not all of them work equally well. With that said, it's impossible not to admire the sheer scope of what the creators have accomplished with Black Science, and it is a must-read for lovers of this particular genre. While I love Richard Morrison's early 90s Doom Patrol, I'll also admit that it is largely because of how insanely weird it can get. This is the least straightforward superhero comic I've ever read. But if you're interested in some absolute imaginative insanity, Doom Patrol is the book for you. Also note that it is only for mature readers. Doom Patrol is certainly not your average comic book. Originally conceived in the 1960s, the Doom Patrol was reborn a generation later through Grant Morrison's singular imagination. Even though they are superpowered beings and their foes are bent on world domination, convention ends there. Shunned as freaks and outcasts and tempered by loss and insanity, this band of misfits faces threats so mystifying in nature and so corrupted in motive that reality itself threatens to fall apart around them. But it's all in a day's work for the Doom Patrol. For those of you who might be a little dissatisfied with the monotony in superhero books, Doom Patrol might be just the thing for you. Now, here are a few other honorable mentions that didn't make it to the top 10, but I would still recommend any reader to try out. This quirky series is all about Susie, a woman who can stop time whenever she has sex. When she meets a guy, John, with the same ability, they use their powers to, of course, rob banks. If you're trying to sell someone on comics and they just so happen to like things like laughing and sex, well, you can't mess with sex criminals. And if they don't like those things, what? Next up is Miracle Man. Miracle Man is another 1980s superhero deconstruction from Alan Moore, the best comic writer of all time. See the Superman and Captain Marvel mythos elevated to a more realistic form. Advice for mature readers only. Third on the list is the Bulletproof Coffin and the Bulletproof Coffin Disinterred. If you like the concept of stories within stories or fiction coming to life and affecting our real world, Bulletproof Coffin is a modern image comics masterpiece from David Hayne and artist Shaky Kane. Advisable only for mature readers again. Matt Kind's Mind MGMT from Dark Horse Comics is another modern masterpiece. Both one of the best spy secret organization stories I've ever read and one of the most innovative comics ever. Highly recommended for reading. Fifth on the list is Moss. It is Art Spiegelman's biographical account of his family surviving the Holocaust, as well as his autobiographical account of his relationship with the said family. It's a harrowing real look at the devastating tragedy of the Holocaust and generational trauma, told with superb skill. Very serious subject matter, so might not be suitable for everyone. Reading comics is a blast, so as you get started, just remember that this should be fun. If you're feeling overwhelmed with the amount of material available, just remember that most comic book readers have felt that at some point in their lives. And the best thing that you can do now is just find a starting point and jump right in. Now, I am not saying that you should read the comics on this list first. It is just a good starting point for anyone who has no idea and wants to start reading. There are some you can skip. Instead of wasting time at all the origin stories and the comic instills of every issue, you can try a few of these out and see if it works for you. Even if these aren't for you, there might be others that are up your alley. This is simply to get your comic book wheels turning and seeing what you like out there. Your comic endeavors either start or end here. But just because you're watching this video, welcome to the community. With that said, if you have any questions, comments or suggestions, do what feels right to you in the comment section below. That's gonna bring this video to a close. If you like this video, do not forget to leave a like below and watch our other videos from this channel. Also subscribe to this channel for more content like this. And since we're in the initial stages, it really helps us a lot if you share the word with your friends. See you next week on Unnecessary Comic Stuff.